Hello world, welcome back to my channel everybody. Recently I did a live stream on Webflow's YouTube channel where I recreated this one interaction from a website. Now, the thing with this interaction that I did was, with the time frame that I had on the Webflow livestream, I wasn't able to show you how to build the interaction itself. I was just able to show you how to add, for example, the animation and the timings and stuff. I wasn't able to show you guys like the structure, the paragraph elements, the headings, the the video and where I placed everything in the sort of navigator and all the styles that I chose. I just had the time to go through the interaction itself. So in this video, my goal is to sort of combine both the build and the interaction aspect to give like a well-rounded full overview instead of just like half of the portion. So yeah, let's just get started. For this particular live stream, I didn't want to make like a full page rebuild like I do in all my other YouTube videos. I wanted to pick something that I could easily teach in 15 to 20 minutes, and what I decided was an interaction. Now, I found some inspiration from this one specific website. I believe I found this on the awards page, but it's basically this hover interaction with sort of a list where as you hover, this image kind of scales and it does this cool animation with this border around it. This is sort of my interpretation of it. This is what I ended up making. So I decided, I've watched the Generation No Code Webflow kind of series on YouTube, and so I decided to pick a few key people who participated in that sort of docu-series, and I decided to kind of put a couple clips of them. So this is Melissa Mendez, John D. Saunders, I think I'm saying that wrong, but yeah, and then Timothy Ricks. So these are all people that I definitely look up to. I've seen their YouTube channels, their Twitter accounts, and yeah, they're great web designers, and I could only hope to be like them. But yeah, this is what I have so far. Again, I recreated this kind of border interaction with the video playing as we hover, and it kind of scales, and then when you hover out, you get that Webflow logo as it kind of leaves, similar to the one on this page right here. Okay, so that's the interaction that I kind of wanted to show you guys. Okay, let me just get right into building it then. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, I already have this sort of header set up, but I'm going to get started making the actual meat of the content, which is, of course, this kind of list. So just going to close that out. Okay. First thing that I'm going to do is grab a list. Okay. I'm going to call this list. Sort of get rid of all of these except for one. I'm going to call this one list item. Give it no style, so no bullets or anything. And yep, okay, so for this list, I kind of want to get rid of this padding here. Okay. Now, inside of this list, if you notice, the first thing before we get to the animation is this text. And as you hover on this text, it changes from being this serif font to this sans serif font. So here's how I'm going to recreate that. Okay, so I am going to grab a div to place all of these different headings in. So the sans serif, the serif, etc. And I'm going to call this list heading wrapper. This is just going to have a position of relative. Okay, now inside of here, the first thing I'm going to do is grab a heading, call it list heading, a font of this serif font. Okay, make it really big, so 6.5 EW. I think, okay, just going to copy that text. And I'm gonna change it, make it fully black, right? Capitalize it, like that. Now that I have this sort of this basic thing, right? So the serif one, Actually, I'm gonna make that normal. Okay, yeah. What I also need, center it. Okay. What I also need is a sans serif one. So if I just copy and paste this one, and I'm just gonna give it a class of sans serif, and I'm gonna change the font. So I have these fonts planned out already. So this fonts are out, pretty much the exact same, except now I'm gonna grab this sans serif and position it absolutely over the top and take up the full thing like this. The problem we're sort of encountering here is that like it's sort of wrapping and going to the next line. So I'm just gonna change, because I think the Montserrat font turns out to be a little bit bigger than the Palantino, so I'm just gonna make this 6.3 VW. Yeah, okay, that fits perfectly. Now to get these really like perfectly on top of each other, what I'm going to do is get rid of this margin at the top. And then what I also want to do is set this sans serif to display none, because as you know, it doesn't, it's not like add by default there. So just gonna close that out. And what I also want to add is sort of another thing, but this one is gonna be called blank. And the reason that I'm doing this is because when we do our animation, right, we're gonna set like one to display none and then the other one to display, but then what ends up happening when I do that is that it loses it like its shape. So if I get rid of this one, for example, right, and I set like this one to display, but then I set this one to display none, as you can see here, this kind of wraps, because this list heading, right, it's set to be positioned absolutely. So when I get rid of the thing that's positioned relative, it kind of doesn't have any space for it to kind of like take up. So that's why I'm gonna set this back to display as it was normally, and I'm just gonna duplicate it. And this one is gonna be called blank, like I already have here. Okay, and what this means is that it's just going to have an opacity of 0. And then I'm going to grab this other list heading and also set this to be positioned absolutely. And this blank should be positioned relatively. There. So we're going to grab this, the normal list heading, so not blank or sans serif, and this is just going to take up the top like that, get rid of that margin, and perfect. So this blank has an opacity of 0, and list heading is visible, but this one is not. So display none. There. So this is what we usually have. This is exactly what we want. Okay, so now that we have those headings finalized, let's move on to just making that animation first, because it'll be, we'll get this one done, and then we'll move on to making the video and the background and everything else. So I'm gonna grab the list item. I'm going to set up a hover interaction on it. So hover, it's going to be called list item hover in. And what we want to happen is we're going to grab the normal list heading one, so the one with no combo classes. And the first thing that's going to happen is that this is going to be set to display none. So hide is going to be hidden, right? And then we're gonna grab our second one, so this sans serif one, and this one is gonna be shown like that. Okay, so the reason that that's not working is because it's affecting everything with the class of list heading. So let's just go back to this normal one and give it a class of normal. Let's go back to our interactions, and now if we sort of change that list heading to be list heading normal, and the second one to be list heading sans serif, now it should work. Okay, there. So it's like a split-second transition, because that's what hide or show does. Okay, so we're done with that. Now I want to make a hover out animation. So list item hover out, and for this we're going to grab the sans one, set that back to display none, grab the normal one, and then set that one to display block. Okay. So now if we go and we hit preview and we try it out, there. Okay, so now that we have the text down, let's get started with making this actual video work. So I'm gonna close this up and I'm gonna drag in a div. So it's going to be called Video Border Wrapper. So this is going to contain both the video and the border, okay? So this is going to be set to flex, vertical, center aligned, okay? It's going to have padding on all sides, so 1 VW of padding on all sides to create this like space, as you can see, between the video itself and the border, okay? And then it's going to have a height of 20 VW. It's going to be set to positioned absolutely, okay? It's going to have a Z index of 30, just so that it's always above the text, okay? Now, the first thing that we want to do inside of here is to get our video in. So I'm going to grab the video, call it Video Wrapper. Okay, so this is just going to be set to position relative. Now, inside of here, we are going to grab our actual video, and I'm going to go down to background video and just upload this video of mine. Okay, so while it's doing that, I'm just going to give it a class. So it's going to have a class of video, and it's not going to have a play pause button, so I'll just check that off, but everything else works, okay? So I'm just going to leave that to do its thing. So, yep. Now this video is going to have a width of 18 VW and a height of 17 VW. It's also going to be set to position relative, like it already is, and it's going to have an index of 2. Only because we're going to have this logo, which I'm going to make just right now. So make this set here, call this video logo, okay? This one's going to be positioned absolutely, and take up the whole thing, right? And have a Z index of 3. And this thing is going to have a background of this image. If I can just get it there. So it's going to have a background of this image, just cover, center aligned. Now, obviously, we don't want this video logo to be shown right now, so I'm just going to set it to display none there. Now we have our video, and that's working too. Okay, let me see if it shows up. Okay, the video is working. Now, what we also want to do is grab this video border wrapper, right? And if we go back to our list item, we'll set this one to position relative. And this video border wrapper can have it positioned absolutely. Okay. Now, the one thing that I want to do with this list item is center align it. So vertical center align, like that. Okay. So that's there. Now let's get started on the actual border. So the first thing that I'm going to do is make a border container. Now each side of the border is going to have one. So there's going to be one for left, right, top, and bottom. Okay. So we're going to first start with the top one. So border container, 20 VW. Okay. It's going to be positioned absolutely. And sorry. Border container positioned absolutely. It's going to be going to the top, right? Now inside of here, I'm going to make another div, and this one is going to be called border wrapper. And this is going to be set to flex horizontal. It's going to have a height of 1 VW and a width of 100%. Again, flex horizontal, and it's going to have a justification of end, just because we want that sort of border animation, which I'll show in a second. Now, inside of here, I'm going to post in another div, call it border. Now, this is going to have a width of 1 rem and a height of 0.2 rem. And it's basically just going to have a background of black, like that. Now I'm just going to keep duplicating this for a while. And because we obviously want gaps in front of them and next to them, I'm going to grab the border wrapper and I'm going to give it a gap between columns of 1 rem. Okay, now as I keep kind of increasing the amount of border there is, right, you can see that each border starts to get progressively smaller, but I don't want that to happen. I want the border size to remain consistent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the border, right? And I'm gonna set this flex child sizing to don't shrink or grow, okay? So that way it won't change its size. So even as I keep kind of duplicating this, it ends up like overflowing and not kind of shrinking everything's size. And now I'm just gonna keep doing this, so duplicate it for a couple times, and I'm gonna grab the border wrapper, or actually the border container, right? And set overflow to hidden on this one, okay? So that's where we're gonna leave it. This is perfect. Now I'm gonna just duplicate this once, okay? Now this is gonna be our bottom. So I'm gonna give this a combo class of bottom, and like we have position at the top here, we're just gonna set position to the bottom on this one. And inside of our border wrapper, we're gonna give it the same class. It's gonna have a couple different styles, so bottom, right? And instead of being justified to the end, it's gonna be justified to the starting. Okay, we're gonna duplicate it once more. This is going to be called border container left. Now this will not have a width of 20 VW, it's gonna have a width of 1 VW. Because again, we're doing it this side, right? We're going this way from here, not this way anymore, so it's kind of being like flipped. So some of the measurements are being flipped too. The height is going to be 18 VW, and the reason for that is if this top here, this top part is 1 VW, and this bottom part is 1 VW, then 20, because remember we set the height of this video border wrapper to be 20 VW. Well, 20 minus 2, so 1 here, is 18. So that's where we're getting that 18 from. Let me just go back. Where was I? Okay, so 18 VW, and it's just going to be set to position left, like that. There's going to be one VW of padding, or sort of this position top at the top, only because we don't want it to be, again, fully pushed up against this. 1 VW at the bottom too, even though it doesn't really matter. Okay, now we're going to go to our border wrapper, right? And I'm going to get rid of this bottom class it has. I'm just going to call it left, okay? And now here, what we're going to change is we're going to give it a height of 100%. Okay, we're going to set the flex to be vertical now. And, okay, so as you can see now, the border wrapper is sort of like pushing up against this border at the top, right? So we're going to go back to our border container and give it 1 VW of space at the top. Okay, so going back to border wrapper. So it's going to be set to flex vertical now. And how it's going to work is that it's going to be aligned to the start this way. And it's going to be justified with space between, like that. Now we're going to change some of our borders too. So I'm going to change this border. I'm going to give it a combo class of horizontal. And I'm actually going to get rid of all these other borders. So I'm just going to delete them until I have just this one left, okay? And basically now what I'm going to do with it is this border, we're going to kind of flip the sizing. So if we go back to this one here, it has 1 rem of width and 0.2 rem of height, right? So we're just going to give this 0.2 rem of width and 1 rem of height. Now if I just keep duplicating this, if it allows me to, okay, so that is my border. I'm going to make it a couple more times. Okay, so that's my border left. Now I'm going to duplicate this one last time. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this class, call it right instead, and just set it to here. Okay, 1 VW spacing at the top. Okay, now we're going to go back to our border wrapper here, get rid of this class, or wait, duplicate this class, call it right, and just set it to be aligned to the end instead. Okay. Now that we have this part done, let's just look and see. Okay, yep, the border looks about right. And the next thing for us to do is to start animating it. So I'm going to close all this up, go back to here, and start animating. Okay, so ignoring this kind of list heading thing, because we already got that one ready, but I'm gonna grab this video border wrapper, and at first it scales, so this is initial state, right? It scales to 0, right? That's where it starts. And it's also rotated initially 20 degrees, 20 degrees on the z-axis. So those are our initial state. Now let's get started on actually animating. So I'm going to click the scale, right? And I want it to scale to 1. And then I want it to rotate back to 0. Okay? And what I also want to happen, which will actually come in handy when we hover out, is I'm going to grab this video logo, and this thing is going to be set to display none. Okay? Yep. Just going to go all the way at the end like that. So now if we go and we see, look at this. Okay. So if you notice carefully, what's happening is that it's kind of like scaling from the middle, right? But if we go back to our sort of animation or our demo here, it's scaling from the bottom right. And to get us to do that, we have to grab our video border wrapper and we have to go down to 2D and 3D transforms. And in our settings, we're going to change the transform origin to be the bottom right. Now if we go back and if we preview this animation, yep, as you can see, it works perfectly there. Okay, now when we animate out, what I want to happen is I'm gonna grab this video border wrapper. It's going to scale back to 0. It's gonna rotate back to 0. Or actually, it's going to rotate back to 20, right? Because that's where it started originally. I'm going to grab this video logo. That one will be displayed, so show, or in block, right? Yeah, now let's save. Let's preview in here. Okay, perfect. Now, the last thing, or the second last thing before we get to animating the border, is sort of getting it to show up wherever our mouse is, right? So no matter if I put the mouse here or here, it kind of shows up at that exact place, right? So how we do that is a simple animation. So we go to list item, right? And I'm going to make another one, but this one's going to be mouse move over element. And it's going to be called list item mouse over. And I'm just going to grab this video border wrapper, right? And at 0%, I want it to have moved negative 90%. And 90%. Now if we check and see, okay, that looks great. Same thing here, but instead of moving it 90%, we're going to move it 20% here, percent, and 20% here. Look and see. Oh, okay. So we have to get rid of, not on X, it has to be on Y this time. So 20%. And the same thing here on Y, negative 20%. Now if we see, there. I'm going to increase the smoothing just a little bit, so maybe make it 70, just so that there's like a little bit of a delay. Okay. Okay. So we got our video playing and this animation occurs, but the only thing left is this border. So here's how we do the border. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to tackle is the border at the top. So I'm going to grab this border container, right, the first one, make a new animation. This is just going to be scroll into view. And we're going to call this border top loop. Okay, so here's what we have to do for this one. We just have to grab the border wrapper inside of here, right? And we're setting it to move. So our initial state is where it is right now. So it's going to be 0%. And then maybe we're going to move it. And our goal with how much we move it is to move it exactly how much percent and try to get it back to the exact same state that it was here. So we're going to keep moving it until we find something that looks similar to this right here. So like I'm just gonna keep moving it a little bit. Okay, wait, that looked pretty similar. Yeah, I'll do one more. Okay, maybe stop at 85%, 90%. Okay, let's go back and see. Okay, see, the initial state and our animation look pretty similar, so I'm gonna leave it at that. And the last thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to move back to 0%. And basically how this works is that this first animation here takes about 3 seconds, okay? But this moving back to 0 takes no seconds, so it happens instantaneously. And that part, you can't really see it if it kind of remains in the same state that it was before, right? So we're gonna hit save, we're gonna hit loop, and then we're gonna preview it. Okay, so that didn't work very well. Let's go and try to troubleshoot and see what went wrong. Okay, let's not do 90%. Let's do 80 and see if that springs. Okay, let's see. Okay, now let's hit loop and let's try. Let's hit preview here instead of going back out. Okay, so now it's working fine. Let's preview again here and see if it works. Let's move it to 70% instead then and see if that works a bit better. Let's hit preview and see. Okay, that's not that bad. Okay, so 45%, and it sort of stops, but not for too long for it to be really noticeable, okay? Now we're just gonna sort of repeat this process for all of them. So I'm gonna grab this border bottom, right? Actually, I'll just duplicate this. So I'll go into here, scroll into view, for this animation, duplicate it. Wait, let me rename it. So border bottom loop. And it's going to, now if we sort of preview it. Okay, let's try that one more time. I'm actually gonna go back to this hero and give it some more spacing just so that we can kind of see what we're working with. Okay, the second border container, border bottom loop, just gonna grab it and we're gonna move it a little bit. Okay, now because this is going in the opposite direction, what we want to do is, so we're gonna hit negative 45%. See if that matches up with how it was before. It's basically perfect. You can't see any difference. Focus on this part here, right? So this is the initial state. This is what we made it to. Okay, now if we hit loop on this and we preview. Okay, just focus on the bottom one there. Oh, we have to, of course, set it back to, yep, okay. We forgot to hit the loop. Okay, let's go and let's see. Okay, now we're gonna do the same things for the left and the right. So just apply, so scroll into view, and it's going to start an animation. Okay. No, okay. Border right loop. And all we want for it to happen is, let's just focus. Okay, so not X values here. We're not focusing on the X, focusing on the Y, right? Because it's moving down. And okay, so I think we made a little bit of a mistake here, but let me just go back to the border wrapper, and we want to set it to be justified to the top. So now if we go and we check it out and we try to move this forward a little, we're just gonna move it down a bit. Okay, so initial state brought us to there. Let's just set the initial state back to 0. We're gonna just, okay, so 20%. Let's go back to this border wrapper because we made some sort of mistake here. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so initial state of 0, that's what it looks like. Okay, let's see if we can. Okay, I think that's good. Now if we just hit loop, preview it in here. Okay, so X not back to 0, the Y has to go back to 0, right? This one maybe will make it something more like 45, 50. Okay, now let's see if that works any better. Okay, let's just stick to 40 then. Okay, now let's see. There's a lot of trial and error with things like this because obviously there's a lot of things bound to go wrong, but here, okay, now we only have one more left, and that is the border to the left. So scroll into view, duplicate this, rename it. Just hit loop. Okay, so that is our animation. As you can see, you hover, okay. Okay, so thank you guys for sticking around till the end. And if you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!